So first I wanted to say thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules. I don't think there was a Drupal developer alive who is not a very busy person. And it's Sunday morning, 10 a.m. But so this presentation is a Drupal 8 Kickstart. It's a very fast-moving conversation about Drupal 8. I think you'll learn a bunch of things if you haven't looked, especially if you have not looked at Drupal 8 yet at all. And the idea is just to give you like a real solid bunch of info at a very fast pace. And I have phpStorm, which I'll open up also, and we'll take a look at it. And just over the last couple of days, I added some very good information on D8 caching and render arrays, and even a little bit of Twig, which I think you'll find like very interesting. So my name is Peter Salvchenets, and I work for Civic Actions. I'm an engineer. So Civic Actions has been around for at least 10 years. They specialize in a lot of government and advocacy websites, and that's how they got started in advocacy. The people at the top at Civic Actions are good friends and very knowledgeable and know all the people at the top in Drupal in general, core people everywhere. So it's a very vibrant community there. It's 100% telecommuting. It is a very good, enlightened company with an excellent benefits package. We are always looking for really good people, systems administration, and things like that. So if you have an interest, look at the website, fill out a form, or go to the table and say hello. I can tell you from my perspective, I've had a lot of jobs. It's a really good one. So let's see. This is essentially today's D8 ecosystem. I just want to mention also, this is loaded to the Badcamp website, this presentation, and everything in here that looks like it's linked is to very good current resources, so this could actually be a valuable tool if you want to download it and use it. But basically, if there's anything on this page you have not looked at or read about or used, you probably should take a look at it because it's going to be in your future fairly immediately, all of these tools. So that's all that's there for. So D8's mission is essentially to take data, push it to a final state of all data rendered correctly, and then let something else, like the theme layer, handle that data. But the idea is to not have anything with divs in it or of any type of HTML coming out of that at the end of that original data. That's headless Drupal. That's that concept, if you've heard about it, that we just deliver you data, and we're headless, and we don't care who consumes it or how you consume it, or even if we consume it as a Drupal 8 theme. We're not concerned with that anymore, so that's the objective. And then this way, whether you're coming from a mobile phone or some web service and you need JSON or you need XML or you need HTML, you can ask for it from Drupal, and Drupal will deliver it to you in that format, not cluttered with HTML. And you should have the least amount of parsing on your side to handle that data correctly. The idea also to leverage industry standard technologies like Symfony, PHP, object-oriented concepts, and so that's how Symfony got there. I do a lot of reading on the topic, and so this is what I can tell you, that the Drupal 8 API reference is probably the single best piece of Drupal documentation that is in existence today. It is so well done and so well organized that if you just went to that page and you read all 20 sections, and then branched out into the next like subsections, you will have your finger on D8 like really well. And then these two books right now are about the only two really good books with a lot of rich D8 information. And the bottom one on configuration management, which is a hot topic, because that's about moving your configuration from dev to live without putting it through features or manually doing it. It also explains just a lot of handy Drupal on the side while he's doing configuration management. And so I can highly recommend these. On documentation that you find online, anything older than March 2015, anything even older than, I swear, June or August of 2015 is probably out of date and wrong. And you're going to read through 90% of it, and you're going to get to the bottom, and you're going to go, no, I just saw this is not done like this anymore. And you will have just like, poured your mind into 40 minutes of analysis to find out that that's not how it got changed a little bit. So I highly recommend you look only at very recent blog posts, preferably dated in 2015. If it's from 2014, it is definitely out of date. But the Drupal 8 API page is really the resource, and that's where everything is current. This is just a special note that Symfony They're using a 2x version right now in Drupal 8, but they plan at some point to upgrade to Symfony 3.0, so that you're advised that if you're planning to write to Symfony like directly rather than to Drupal, that you plan that you're going to be writing towards Symfony 3, and if you write to Symfony 2, you may have problems yourself where your code might not work. And then real quick, we're just going to, these are all the essentials. Drush, Composer, YAML files, object-oriented comments and testing. So if you don't use Drush, you should be. And if you do use Drush, and I assume everybody is, it's like the best thing out there. It's just incredible. If you haven't heard Drush or used Drush like deeply, like Drush can log you in and change users and throw ad hoc queries at the database. Just like everything. I log in, since I use Drush, I would say I log into websites, I don't know, 10% of what I used to. And I almost never point and click anything. You export features, you import features, you do like every single action in the world through Drush. So I can highly recommend it. So Composer is PHP's actually new version of bringing libraries into your frameworks and into your tasks and into your jobs and into your websites. So if you haven't looked at Composer yet, it's a very important product because PHP is settling on it, Drupal is settling on it, Symfony settled on it. Almost every major framework out there of every kind uses Composer. And how Composer works is you install it and then you tell it in a JSON array all the things you use here and what version. So now that you've figured out how all these libraries work together cohesively at these versions, you basically lock it. And then from here on out, wherever you distribute it, and they go, okay, download everything, and they use Composer like install, they will get all the libraries you specified at the version you specified and nothing else. And now your product continues to work. So that's an important feature, because people then aren't downloading the newest version of everything, and you find out that it breaks your website or it breaks your package. So that's an interesting thing about Composer. And then in Drupal 8, so besides just bringing down external libraries, in Drupal 8, they actually want you to manage your modules, and that you would put Composer's JSON files in your modules too to download libraries and let people just go Composer update and pull down everything that's needed with your things that you're rolling out. So this is just a quick screen capture of what like a fairly large-scale Drupal site might have installed, all the things running. So once all these things are entered into a Composer file, after this, it's just Composer install and Composer update, and all these 20 tools get updated for you all the time, and it's great. So Composer Manager is the module that they're putting into D8, which will give you other Drupal-specific type of updates, so you can just basically say, update all my modules.
That's in core?
No, I don't think Composer Manager is in core, no. But there are Composer JSON files in Drupal, and I believe core maintainers use them to do what they need to do, but they haven't pushed that out yet as a total concept to all developers. So YAML files, all the .info files, your install files, a lot of stuff, menu hooks, everything now is in YAML files. So YAML looks a lot like JSON. It stands for YAML Ain't Markup Language. So it's a recursive acronym that they said. And all of the configuration in Drupal is saved into YAML files and pulled out of YAML files. And so the largest benefit of this is when you're on your dev environment and you get everything configured the way you want, you say export config, it goes down as a giant YAML file, you get it, you push it to live, and now you do import config, and all your config comes into live. And no more like pushing the database and trying to wonder what you did and using features. And so that's what YAML was really originally brought in for, but then they just started doing everything with it. And essentially every type of thing in Drupal that's configured in any way is in a YAML file. So it's very important about the structure. It's case sensitive. The two-space indenting is expected to be followed, no tabs. If you indent something wrong, then it's read wrong. Like if the indenting isn't correct for what you're trying to say in your JSON pattern, Drupal might read it wrong, some other tool might read it wrong. So schema files, just like XML has, you know, I forget what they were called, schema files also, I think. So you can make a schema for the XML you expected. So there are schema files for YAML files too. So that if someone is going to make a YAML file that interacts with your product, that you have a schema that tells them what it should look like so that they know what to create for you. This is a sample YAML file. This comes from the core services YAML file. And, you know, like, so basically what's going on in here is, like, you see there's cache context IP, cache context headers. So these are the names of services. That first term is more than likely the module that's making it, or the class file. And then that's the next item. It's pointing to the class file that is making this service. The default arguments that it accepts, and then under tags, all the services are grouped by tags, so later if you want to find all cache services or request stack services, you can search for it and get a big list of them, and they're organized that way. So that's just a quick look at that. So into classes real quick. So everything in Drupal, whether it's called a plugin or anything, is a class file. And your module, all of your technology, you still make a module file, but basically it only has like help in it and a couple of other things. There's like, your module file is basically empty nowadays. And all of your functions and technology is expected to be offloaded into a class file or many class files that accompany your project, and you're using properties and methods out of your classes rather than having, you know, random functions all over with includes and everything. So a set of, it's a set of methods and properties organized in a file and not a set of functions. But methods in a class are functions out in a PHP file. They're the same thing. Okay, so controllers, routers, forms, plugins, all now classes in V8. And like I said, all your general functionality should be created in class files. So an interface is a special kind of class file. And this is about control. This is, again, about quality of your product and being maintained. So if you create your product as an interface, and then someone wants to modify your product by implementing your interface, they must use all of the functions that are in your interface. They cannot skip any. If they do, you know, a major error state as Bootstrap happens, and it'll throw errors. So when you say I'm making an emailer tool, and these are the 4 main functions that handle it, and you create it as an interface, and someone wants to take your email tool, but say change how it actually sends emails, you know, so by POP3 rather than SMTP, they still have to execute all the functions you put in your interface for theirs to run correctly. And so this, again, this is for control and organization. So your class implements other people's interfaces, and you can implement multiple interfaces. But every interface you implement, you must implement all of their methods that they have in the interface. An abstract class is kind of like a little bit of a weaker interface. In an abstract class, only the functions that are called abstract methods must be implemented by the class that's, you know, trying to use it. And all the other functionality is actually, you know, fair game. You don't have to use it, you can use it. So, so you extend an abstract class and you implement an interface. And you can extend one abstract class only, but you can implement an unlimited number of interfaces, as you see in the final line. So again, like, I'm showing things. If you're familiar with it, great. If you're not, you know, this isn't like we're not like planning to learn everything here, but later when you see it in documentation or you see it in a task or in a module, you know, it'll come to you. So, and a trait is just a special PHP file that has a bunch of functions that do related things. And so you can package a bunch of common functions that you don't think is serious enough to go in a class, but so you make a trait file and you dump them in there and you have like 5 functions that you use all the time. So here's a quick generic PHP class overview. So this first file, let's say it's called YAML PHP. See, it has a couple of abstract functions in it, so you know they must be used, right? This is an abstract class offering 3 abstract functions. Now here's an interface called plain and an interface called gun. So they have 2 functions in there. If you implement these interfaces, you must use these 2 functions. So now these are all in their separate files, and class files are usually named exactly, the file name exactly like the class is named. That's a standard. So now, this is the class that is using the abstract class and the two interfaces that I just talked about. And right there at the top, that's what it's saying. Use is basically like include. It means I want to pull in the functionality from those files. So person extends MAML and it implements plain and done. And you can see it uses all of the functions that, that those other classes offer. And then it even puts in two of its own, which is set job and get job. And that's how you take other people's technology, work with it, but also extend it or enhance it or alter it as you need. And then finally, we make it to the last PHP file, which actually is doing some stuff, some procedural code. So it pulls in your person class, which is implementing and extending all of the parent classes. And down here, you're actually executing, you instantiate the class and you make an object out of it. And then there's a PHP function to grab all the methods off of it. And then immediately you can execute the methods that are in all of the technology that we just described is all here now for you to use. Yes?
Maybe I missed this, but what is, I don't think I've seen abstract methods before. I've seen abstract classes, so what does that do?
The abstract method means when you say you're going to use, like we go up one, where it says I'm using YAML, which is an abstract class, and has 3 abstract methods in it. That means your class, this one here, must use those abstract methods. Yes.
Okay.
And the ones that are not labeled abstract are optional. So this is what what a normal class file might look like in Drupal. So this is actually in a module that I'm working on that I call Tracking Inject, and this is an event subscriber, which is where hooks have gone. And so it's commented out here, but what this thing is basically saying on the response event, do something. And that's how it's done. Yes. Oh, sorry. So this particular file is in your module. It's located in the source directory, in a directory called event subscriber, and then in a PHP file that's a class that has a name related to the event that you are trying to subscribe to. And the strategy I just described to you is mandatory. If you don't structure it like that in your module, at Bootstrap time, Drupal will not see your event and will not know that you're trying to hook into it. So this is a common thing in Drupal now, and that's called the PSR4 standard, which is the PHP something reference. And that basically says that for building tools that use object-oriented programming, the classes are put into your module in a certain directory style. And that's how frameworks read for your technology. And that's how all frameworks read for your technology, according to these directory structures. So, as you can see up there, this particular single class is namespaced in Drupal as Tracking Inject module, the event subscriber, and it's using all of these Symfony components exactly the way I just described, except these are all Drupal files now. And these long paths that you're going to see, and these long terms in camel case, all very normal, and camel case is the required style. A lot of the, where we used to do underline connected, underscore connected, that's going away, and you're really expected to use camel case correctly, properly, all the time. Okay, dependency injection. This is a very big topic. You certainly can read on it, but essentially here's what dependency injection is. And that article that I'm underlining there is probably the best one out there. It's like 8 pages long, starts you at the bottom. It's very dense, it's very dry, it's very boring, but it's really good. So, but here's what happens. When you have a class, let's just go back real quick. When you have a class, so like say in that get subscribed events function, it might say, create new guzzle object. Pull down a URL and start parsing it. So now the problem with that is, in your class now, it's using guzzle, and that's like hard-coded in there. And for someone to change it, they have to either make a child class out of your class and then change it in there, right? Or they just go and hack your file and they change it physically. So with dependency injection, what you say is, when they instantiate the class, let's go back, right there, where we do people equals new person, as a parameter, you would pass in what you want to tell that tool to use to send email. So at that point where you instantiate new person, you might say SMTP. And you might actually pass it a fully formed SMTP object that you've created somewhere else in your code. Now you pass that in, and then in the class, when it receives it over here, it would be coming in as a parameter, and it could even be typed. And then in here, it says, just use what they sent in. And that's dependency injection. You are injecting into the class the dependencies that you want. Okay, so you don't have to, like I said, read into it. This is used a ton in Drupal, and this is how they actually really want you to build your own technology in the future. They want you to use dependency injection so that other people can play with your stuff like very easily. And the other benefit of dependency injection and class structure like this is, say you built this very complex technology. So now you need to test it, right? You've put in 4 different ways to send email. But now you're in an environment where like none of these things work because they're not set up. So how do you test this? So you invent like a dummy email service, or you invent anything that you think works in your testing environment, and you inject your testing environment into your class, and now you can test it all you want because you're controlling it, but you have injected into the class your test environment rather than a real environment. And so now you can run through all your code as if everything's working and test for errors and everything. And that's really like a key reason why we have dependency injection. Okay, everything that your modules offer as a function or as functionality is called a service. And Drupal calls everything a service. Even if you go get a config item variable, that's a service. You're using like the config settings service. So that's just something to know about. And plugins, blocks have become plugins. So there's another nice feature. So rather than having like 3 or 4 functions, you know, block, view, and block, whatever, that could be located all over the file, you have to make a block plugin file, which is a class, and then it has to extend Drupal's base plugin interface, so you must put in the 4 functions that they expect you to put in there, and that's how you build blocks correctly now, and everyone builds them the same and puts them in the same place, and then when you come there. And also, just as a footnote, when you create the content output of the block, Drupal 8 really wants you to send it as a render array, as a fully finished render array. The desire is that nowhere in your module creation anymore, when you create the final HTML output, you should have nowhere open div, put in values, close div, send that down to the theme. There should be no divs, no HTML, no nothing. Only raw data comes from you and goes down to the theme. And that's to keep it headless so that everything you create could be converted to JSON or XML or whatever the particular user is asking for. Comments and code. Comments are, I've been in meetings where people just get livid about comments. I don't comment. That's just so much work, and my code is reads like a novel. It's completely understandable. No, I've never had to comment anything. But so this is another nice technique being introduced here in D8. All the documentation comes straight out of your comments, and when your comments are made correctly, saying what kind of parameters and what type are they expected to come in, and what do you return, and what type is it, and a one-liner about what your function does, the documentation, the tools read that stuff out and create documentation for you. So that's on your own functions. In some particular items, there's particular comments called annotations, like in your blocks plugin, where the comments you put above in your file are actually being read by Drupal at Bootstrap time to discover what type of technology and functionality you're offering. If your annotations are not correct, your functionality is not understood correctly and can't be used by the system. So I'm recommending to you, it's vital that your annotations must be accurate and use the formats and have in there what's expected. All your other comments, that's actually optional, but I am telling you, I recommend to you to start now. If you don't comment religiously, if you don't comment, the parameters coming in that you expect and what type are they, and you don't comment like what you return an array or false, you really should start doing that. So I'm recommending it. Method chaining, you've probably seen it if you look at that last line down there, or if you look at these lines, you've seen this in code. So what method chaining is every step in the chain, you know, object edit button, change the CSS, slide it up, slide it down. So, I'm sorry, every one of these, let's say methods, returns the full object. And that's why each of these can just keep operating. Because this doesn't just return the CSS portion, it returns that entire edit button all the way down the chain. So that's why you can just keep linking them together like that, and that's called method chaining. So method chaining does not happen by magic. If you want your stuff to be method chainable, you must actually return the entire object at the end of every one of your functions and not just return color is blue. You need to return entire color object at the end. And then you can method chain even your own work. And so method chaining on multiple lines and method chaining in Drupal, which you've probably seen. So the DB update object, it's returning from the abstract database abstraction layer a DB update query object. And they all keep returning the object, and that's why you can chain it like that. Short array syntax. This is so cool. Everyone knows this, but this is so cool. After PHP 5.4 and up, you can now use the short array syntax to create all your array structures. You don't have to do that first, declare the empty array construct. You can just declare this thing, or build it straight directly like that. When you go into Drupal 8, you're going to see the vast majority of all arrays being made in this new short syntax way. They just like jumped on it, and it's like all over. So that's why I figured I would show it, and it's really cool because it saves, you know, like all those arrays that you just say array equals array, and it's a little cleaner now, and you can look at it a little faster. Type hinting. So I mentioned it before, but so many, and in Drupal 8, all core functions, when they accept a parameter, have it typed, which means when PHP runs this functionality, it's going to check. When it tries to run on response, it's going to go, is the event parameter coming in of the type filter response event? If yes, it'll keep operating. If no, it will throw a fatal error. So you are expected really to type hint all of your functions, all your methods in your classes to maintain that high level of quality control, and PHP is taking care of it for you. So that's really nice. So that's type hinting.
So it's not really hinting because you have to, like it's...
Right, right. Once you're type hinting, it's mandatory.
Really strong.
Right. I don't know how it became. Maybe at the beginning, maybe 5 years ago, type hinting was like optional.
Oh,
it was a suggestion just for you to see and know what was expected there. But now it's a mandatory, and PHP checks for it. So in the first one, it's expecting page to be an array, and in the second one, it's expecting it to be a filter response event.
It could be vague though, right? If you put an abstract class name in there instead of the defined, right?
I don't know if you can type in with an abstract class name. I don't know what that would achieve for you. Other than that, it's saying I expect an entire PHP object of this abstract class type to arrive. You know?
Yeah, but you could, right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Basically, the whole goal is that you inject an interface, so any object, I mean, implemented an interface.
Right, an interface.
Right, an
That's
interface,
the goal
correct.
of interfaces and dependency injection.
But then it would be vague, because there could be 5 functions defined, right?
But that's not, you can swap. You can swap any object in
Right.
in the interface.
But it is, and forms actually do that. Forms expect the form data to be coming in based on a Drupal form interface. And if it doesn't have all of that in it and match how the interface is built, your forms fail. Right. Okay.
So it could be the actual class, like a class object or any of its children.
It's an interface. I don't know.
Any object implementing that interface. So you might create your own implementation and just inject it and it will work.
Okay. Very good. So that's the idea, just to get a quick idea of everything. So this is essentially the new top-level directory structure. Now, someone told me yesterday that this actually changed a tiny bit. I changed a lot of stuff last night. I did not have time to get to this. But so, like, I don't know what changed, but someone said to me, oh yeah, one of the directories changed. I'm like,
Vendor's directories now.
Okay, well anyway, but this is still pretty accurate. And the idea is now, when you come in, the idea is for you to be able to more quickly find where you need to be. So right there at the top level under modules, that's where custom and contrib are, like right underneath that modules. And everything from Drupal core, that belongs to core, is actually up there in core. And all the libraries it uses are there in the libraries. No, I'm sorry, that's your libraries directory. Core has its own libraries inside. Now, you still have sites in case you're doing a multi-site, installation, but essentially now, all the modules for this one site or that you plan to use on every site go up there in modules, and the same thing with themes.
So there's no more default really in sites?
No, it's still there, yeah, right. But that's only if you're doing a multi-site, installation. If you were not, you're just running off this top level and you're good. And that's the idea, to make it a little easier. Yes, sir?
Could you still override a module and site's default?
I believe so, right. I would think it has to work, yes.
Okay.
But that's not like a very wise idea. There are going to be a lot of modules laying all over the place. Someone's going to come in 2 years later and go, I don't know, this one's 4.5, that one's 5.7. That's like weird, And then they're going to have a big meeting about it. Okay. All right. And so there you go. Inside modules, contrib and custom. And then that's my custom module. That's your custom module. So mine is actually a symlink to where I keep that module in its own repo. And so I can work in it in an actual Drupal environment. I symlink it into here. And, and this way I can edit and have versioning in tracking inject that's not related to the website that it's sitting in. Okay, this is basically what's inside core. See how it has everything to itself? Testing, themes, vendor, includes, config, assets, lib. Okay, this is what sort of a modern D8 module would look like, the directory structure. That's tracking inject. And I don't know if you've seen that tool called tree, but that's what it does. It reveals the tree down to whatever levels you tell it to, the directory you're in, so you might get this quick, beautiful, formatted look of a directory. So essentially, anything that's going to be configuration is going to be up there in that config directory, and that's where it has to be. And even the case structure is mandatory. And source, SRC, that's essentially where everything is in your project. After these couple of YAML files at the top, and your module file, everything else is expected to be down in source. And so there's event subscriber, and there's where forms are. And again, like I'll repeat, it has to be in those directory structures like that, in the same case, named exactly like that, or it will not work. Okay, here's a quick look at Bootstrap. Read the settings file, make an object, class loader, set up the error handler, detect if Drupal is already installed, create a kernel, initialize the services container, and that was the YAML file we were looking at, add the container into the class, attempt to serve the page from the cache, load all variables, and we're going to take a look at caching. It's going to be really good. Load all the variables and load other necessary include files, register stream wrappers, create the request object, let the Drupal kernel handle it, return the response, send the response, terminate the request. Okay, so this is where all of the info files went, and some certain hook functionality went from D7 into YAML files in D8. So your module info file is now an info YAML file. Anything that used to be in hook menu is now in the routing YAML file. Hook menus to make admin menu entries are in the links menu YAML file. Hook permissions is in permissions YAML file. And then services, so when you make your class in your module and you name it, emailer class, all right, extra emailer, you're going to have to create a services YAML file that describes your extra emailer, the class that handles it, and a couple of other things. And this is actually where Drupal is going to find your class at Bootstrap time. It's not going to find it in here. So that's why I was saying, if you don't follow all the conventions, your stuff is just not going to work. So they've really cracked down on that. So this is what your services YAML file might look like. So it's namespaced after your module to keep it, for all those common reasons to keep it from getting confused with other people's manager functionality or response event functionality. So again, I am using a response event. It actually has to be documented in here just like this. Or again, your event subscriber thing just won't work because it won't get found. It's actually being looked for in here and not by going through all of your directories and reading all your code. It's going in here. And that's for it to be speeded up and to keep the locations common and for there to be a very big fast read. And so someone in core figured out like a really excellent way, apparently like 10 times faster than they used to parse files, and they're extremely pleased with that, and that's why we have this. So we have the service that I'm offering. Tracking Inject has a manager service, which means that you can like pull up a form, make entries, hit save, pull up that form, edit it, hit save. And so I have to tell it that that's all found in the Tracking Inject Manager class section of Tracking Inject module. And tags, again, like I said, those are names of like the families they belong to, so later they can be found as groups. So D8 hooks have become event subscribers. Those links, are good to explain that. And these are all a quick look at all the actual events that you have to deal with. Controller event, exception events, finish request, the start of the request, the response, the terminate, and when the view, that's like all the HTML is being compiled.
Can you go one slide before that? Go there.
The controller event is when Drupal reads the URL and the query string and says, where do I need to send this? That's the controller event. So right there at that time, if you wanted to do some extra analysis of your own, some extra access control, you would do it right there at the controller event. And you would step in and say, before anything happens, I want to know what kind of user is this, what was in the URL, is everything good? And then you can let it keep going or you could stop it. So core functionality, everything, all the little details that you used to think were like a variable get, and a lot of other common functionality is now a service that's declared in core, and they are, but here's what Drupal did for you. They made a giant object at Bootstrap time called Drupal, and you can find it just by putting that backward slash in front of it. And once you have the Drupal object, you have everything. You have all the settings. You have the user information. Everything that you used to need like 10 different places to go look. Find the user, find the node, find the access, find entities. All of that's hanging on Drupal now, on this one giant Drupal object with many methods and properties branched off of it. So it's really actually quite nice. And we'll have some examples. So now you want to find out if a module exists. This is exactly how it's done. You are grabbing the Drupal object, the module handler method, does module exist, and the module that you're looking for, content translation. This will return either true. I believe it will return true, yes, or false. So here's how you get the current user, again, off the Drupal object. And here's how you get a config setting from some module. You want to find out what translation module settings are, or devel settings, like whatever. And that period, the dot notation, is very standard in many places. So, and I heard a very good explanation for why that is yesterday, and this is really good, so I'll mention it. Like sometimes when you're, iterating through an item and you don't know right now, is it an object, is it an array, is it a multi-level array, is it an array of arrays? When you do it with dot notation, Drupal handles for you whether it was an array or an object and returns the property you were asking for and does it correctly for you when you use dot notation. So you don't have to know whether you're trying to get an object property or whether you're trying to get an array element or an array element of an array. You do some module settings, and that's probably an object, but Drupal will handle that for you. You don't have to tell it, I'm trying to get an object. A couple of more examples. This is how to get a variable called the domain ID. So basically, that's very similar to what you used to do, variable get. Is like that now. This is getting the entire request object. This is if you want to find out the URL and A couple other things that is available in the request. So now you're from the request object, you want to go into the attributes and you want to get if there were any exceptions. And then in that exception, what is the status code? Okay, so that's variable get and variable set are replaced by core services where you are dealing with states and settings and overrides. And this is basically the format. This is to get you the front page. What is the front page? What used to be front, or what is front, or whatever. I forget what that function is. There was like 5 of them, and they kept changing and throwing them away and bringing them back. So getting a variable, Drupal config, module name, settings, get me the variable I want. Drupal config from the system, site settings, get me page front. Setting a variable. So I didn't finish like completely understanding it, but basically, conf variables that are in settings PHP, variables that some module sets, and variables that are completely just on this page load. Those are actually 3 different types of variables now. They're not all just one variable get that's pumped into like the variables table. All those are different types of settings, and you're supposed to manage them separately. So you are not supposed to directly change conf. It's just not right, because that was a permanent setting meant to manage this website permanently. So you as a module should not be coming in and changing conf. But if you absolutely must, you must come in through the config factory settings, and you must get the editable version of the conf setting you're trying to change. You can't just write on top of it. So, and what's going to happen is Drupal is actually going to do some checking in here to make sure you're actually sending valid values and everything and all of that stuff. And this is to prevent developers from breaking sites by just putting the wrong information in places and just saying, hey, make that an array of string. And then it takes like, 9 hours for someone to figure out like what broke. So that's control on that. If you want to unset a variable, first you go get it from the config, and you assign it to a variable, and then you clear it. And then you have to save it. If you don't save your clearing or your deletion, it does not actually get cleared or deleted.
You can just chain that, right, instead of 2 lines?
Right. Can you, that you would say system performance clear, cache page?
Yeah.
Probably you can. I'm trying to think why that would be like that. I know there's reasons, there's times when you want to assign everything first to a variable. That's for performance, in case you're doing like 9 things to it. But, all right, it could be. But I have to withhold official comment on whether that must be like that or it's just visually optimized.
Yeah, I think it just looks better for that.
Yeah. You
don't have to. I was just wondering if you could do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so settings. I was just discussing that with you. It's something you're going to have to like explore on your own. I just, there's like so many things, I can't keep covering it all. But like I said, I'm just trying to make you aware that in settings, it's more complex than it used to be, a higher level of refinement. Okay, so now let's look at caching real quick. So there are 2 big concepts in caching. What should be cached, and then how do I invalidate it later to say, wipe this out so I can make a fresh copy. So, and Drupal 8 deals with it a lot, and it's turned a lot of refinement into it too. So Wim Leers, who handled almost all that stuff, said caching is easy. It's merely storing the result of an expensive computation to save time the next time you need it. Now I just put this here because it's an excellent, if you are ever working on a project and some client says to you or someone else says to you, like, why are you caching this or should this be cached? Basically you say, if this is expensive, if it takes a long time to do, yes, we should cache it. Cache invalidation is, okay, so now how do I wipe that out because the data changed? Or how do I know the data changed to wipe it out? And so those are the 2 main features or things you got to deal with caching. So a couple of quick concepts when you start reading on DA caching, there's all the great links. Big pipe. So Facebook started saying, we get like so many hits, we have so much data, our pages are taking like 9 seconds to load, and they were having a heart attack. And this is like, 10 years ago already. So they said, okay, we're just going to AJAX stuff. That's basically, and they called it big pipe. But so basically what they're doing is they render the page, and they send to you immediately the framework. So the page looks like it's loading. And then they're Ajaxing in blocks using JSON, JavaScript to fire off requests to bring back JSON with CSS and JavaScript that's already loaded on the page that handles it as it comes in. And so that's big pipe. So Drupal 8 went big pipe and is actually doing that by default. So in Drupal 8, caching is turned on by default for both administrators and for anonymous users, which is an amazement and cool. But that's how they're doing it, big pipe. So then they tried to call it Smart Cache in Drupal for a while, and then they changed it to Dynamic Page Caching, and that's like sort of the latest name. So other things to know: cache keys, cache comments, cache tags, and max age. These are all words, strings, constants, numbers, variables that you can assign to your renderable array to tell Drupal how and when these things need to be invalidated. And we're going to look at an example. Like I said, we don't have to read everything, but so essentially, am I rendering something? Yeah, I got to think if I got to cache it. Is it expensive? That's worth caching. And then so I'm going to name it. I'm going to name my cached item, and that's the cache keys. So that's the first part of your caching strategy. I need to name my cacheable item. Now after that, when does my cacheable item need to be wiped out and reset? It can be wiped out and reset when the context changes, when the tags change, or when max age is hit. Okay? The context is big things, like the URL is different. And actually, I'll show it to you. These are the big thing contexts that could change, that could cause your cache to be invalidated and Drupal to render it fresh before it sends it. Cookies change, headers change, IP changes, language type, the route, the session, the theme, time zone, changes in the URL and changes in the user. These are all the largest scale context changes that could occur where you're saying, when my array renders, I'm going to put a term in there that says cache context equals user. And so Drupal now knows if the user changes, I need to make fresh data on this piece because it's cached by user. So, and we'll take a look at an exact example. So max age, and so, I'm sorry, tags. Tags is when you say if node 57 changes, this block changes. This render array on this block changes. So you can tag your block with a cache tag that says if node : 57 changes, my block gets invalidated and needs to be rendered over. And max age, I pulled this out separate. Max age is where you say, oh, in 1 day, in 30 seconds, every 3 weeks. Or permanent, if you don't specify max age, the setting is permanent. It will never get uncached. It'll get built one time. Max age 0 means I am not cacheable. And then lastly, max age set to a number in seconds gets you time. So this is a render array. This has got pretty much everything that you can find in a render array today. And part of that is the cache contexts. So in render arrays, everything that begins with a hash mark is a property of that first variable, the build array. And then everything under that is all the elements in those things, all right? And sometimes those elements are arrays, and this is using the short array syntax, as you can see. There's no array words constructs in here. So basically, there's a prefix, there's markup, which is literal HTML, there's a suffix, and prefix and suffix are things that are wrapped around later, everything else that gets, processed. Theme. So previously in the past, in render arrays or in other environments, when you're theming, you would make all your data and you would say, send it to my theme hook function, my hook theme. They don't want you to do that anymore. They really want you to send everything to TPLs. And even though that looks like a function name, it's actually a TPL name, and it will go look for a TPL. Now, that was an option anyway in theming, where you could say, send it to a file. You would specify a TPL file in the file attribute, and it would go put it in a file. So they've come to the conclusion that putting them in functions, which end up all over the place and get really messed up, has been really bad, and that by trying to tell you Remember, you should only be delivering data out of your module, and at the end, everything goes cleanly into a theme function, which they prefer it be a TPL file using Twig. So that's what that theme is saying, that it's saying that's the TPL file for this finished logic, and here's my caching constraints on what will cause this render array to be changed. If the user changes, if there's a change in some query string arguments, the exact one being quantity, if the URL changes, if let's see, keys, right? If there's a change, and I just made up stuff, I'm sorry, so that's like bad. But if something called demo changes, change me. If there's a change in the my module build render function, change me. If node 42 in English changes, if in the config system someone makes changes to the performance setting, or in 5 minutes. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have all of these, but this is pretty much all the different ways you can cause your render array to be invalidated and built fresh based on any of those tags. And so when Drupal, yes?
Is there any priority between the context keys or tags? Something that is going to be more prominent?
Well, I think in reality how it turns out is the smallest item is the most important. It has to bubble up. So it's going to go all the way down to node 42 English. And then it's going to come up to the query and to the user. So if node 42 has changed, that causes user to have to change, because that's a very granular change. Okay, but here's the bonus though. If this is a render array for a page, this is going to mess up the whole page if only a single node changes. But if this is just the render array for a block, and that node changes, only the block is going to get uncached, redone, and it's going to come down big pipe style into the rest of the cached page. So what Drupal is saying is that even if you change 5 items on the page with these cache parameters, a block, a login thing, they're still going to go into the cache. They're going to grab 80% of the finished page, cut off 80% of the SQL queries, and only rebuild your guys. And on top of that, they're going to be sending the response while they're building those new guys, and they're going to come in Ajax with JSON. So very heavy stuff. Yes?
In the case of this scenario here with where you're validating by user, would it maintain separate caches per user, or would every time a separate user login regenerate?
Massive cache collections. So, and then at the back end in settings PHP, you can tell Drupal what type of caching mechanism to use. Use your own, or I want to change to varnish, or I want to use some other. There's like many types of caching mechanisms. You can tell it to not use Drupal's in case you think you've got faster caching product at hand yourself. So, okay, just one more important concept. First here, you can load your jQuery library. jQuery does not load by default on any page anymore. It only loads if Drupal looks through all the stuff and says someone's asking for it. All JavaScript is like that now. Only gets loaded on that page if it has been asked for. There's no more extra JavaScript, no more extra CSS getting sent down with every page for no reason. So anyway, this is where you can say, I need the jQuery library, I'm creating some Drupal settings. Those are done through this attached property. And so pre-render, this is very cool, and it's actually important to know for caching. So if Drupal came in and said, hey, I look at this and I go, oh, it says it needs to be re-rendered, and it goes and it re-renders it and it caches it, and now it comes back again on the next hit. If you had, like, sometimes when you build a block and it says, okay, block content, the first thing you see is like an SQL query to go get data, someone does, and then they put that into a render array and they return it. So if Drupal just did that, it would actually run all those SQL queries before it found out that this item is cached from the render array, and you don't want that. So what pre-render does is, instead of having that functionality loose, just out there in the flow, in front of things, you actually put it in your pre-render function. All that stuff, all the things you need to do to find out what goes into your render array. And then when it's cached, Drupal does not even look at pre-render and does not run any excess functionality for nothing. It only runs pre-render when it knows the cache has been invalidated and actually has to run it. So, when you get there, Okay, into Twig. That's how a Twig variable is printed. There's no more $sign. Logic conditionals is put in those % signs. You have filters, which is basically variable, pipe it into safe join, join them on commas, and then after that, pipe it all into lowercase. So that's what's going on there, and that's how you can manipulate variables in Twig, sending it through, and you can make your own custom filters, so you can send variables in the TPL through custom functions by attaching them with a pipe to functionality. So attributes, Drupal makes a big attributes object that it sends down to every TPL that has like all the classes and things like that. If you're a themer, that's good news, interesting news for you. I just want to point out, like it says, they don't want a space between whatever HTML is ending and where your Twig variables begin with that double brace. They want it to just abut, the way you see it there. And if you need to make a class, an array of classes yourself in your TPL file, which you're going to print out over here, that's how you set up an array, a quick array in a Twig file. So that's a quick look at Twig. Routing and controllers. So a route in Drupal is any URL that's coming into the website. For that URL to get properly handled by a controller, you must tell it in your routing YAML file. So previously where you had menu hooks, where you put paths that you want to put custom functionality on, instead now you have a routing YAML file, and there's the path, and then this is the class, the controller class that's going to get fired off when it runs, and after that, I forget what that thing is called, the content function is actually going to get fired inside example controller when someone goes to the example path. And that is how you menu hook in Drupal 8, like that. And then, I'm sorry, but there was the access control under permissions. So it's put in as a requirement that they can access content. And that can be, a comma delimited array, whatever. So in case you have multiple levels. So blocks are now a plugin, and they would like your content to be returned as a render array. Configuration management I mentioned earlier. That's where all configuration is now comes from YAML files on the way in when your module is enabled, and gets saved to YAML files when you're moving it from website to website. And there's some good links on it. So let me just look at the time. Wow. Okay. Configuration inspector. It's a module. You turn it on. Now you have an admin page that shows you all the configs that every module in your website is making, and you can see it in a nice human readable format in one place. So that's very handy. Drupal Console. You download this into your website, and then when you want to build your first Drupal 8 module, you go Drupal Console, make me a module, and it sets up the entire framework for you. All the stuff we described with the proper directories and files, and all the dummy methods filled in, and that's where you start. Partial list of the commands, things that can make forms and plug-in block for you immediately. You can make an image effect, generate a service. Module upgrader, in theory, takes your D7 module and tries as hard as it can to convert it to a D8 module for you automatically. I'm sure that's a pretty good starting point for converting from D7 to D8. Testing in D8 is moving towards BHAT, trying to get out of simple test, but I heard a discussion on it. There is so much thousands of lines of simple test, they just don't know how they're ever going to get out from it, but they're trying. And then some resources. This is the only one that I really like is this last line, because I found this out only like a year ago. Everything at every DrupalCon is that every presentation is actually recorded and then put on this YouTube channel for Drupal Association. So every great presentation you thought you missed at a DrupalCon, you can actually just go watch it on YouTube real quick. So let me just escape out of here. And this is PHPStorm. You are looking at tracking inject, but I'm just going to show you Devel. So here's Devel, and this is how the Devel module looks today.
Can you make that bigger?
Yeah, forget. Somebody knew how to do it, but probably not me, unfortunately.
And it slide up on your mouse pad.
Command, Control, Alt. I'm on Ubuntu, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I don't know that.
Presentation mode is one of those communities.
Yeah, someone mentioned that too, right? Presentation mode.
And I have no idea
What'd you say?
The third menu over.
Oh.
That's it.
Good one. Wait.
On the bottom.
All right. Very nice. Okay, so, but how do I get to my, okay, so what was it? Control U, did you say? How do I get out of here? And,
There's a menu.
oh, excellent. Okay, so wait, I'll take you back there in a moment, but let's just, we need to look at this. Let's say Alt 1. Just see, in presentation mode, it knocked out the left column. But this is what's important. You have all those YAML files, and you have one module file. They actually have an includes file up here, bad. And they're installed, but they have a composer JSON file where they want you to manage Devel in the future, or they're definitely managing it using Composer themselves when they need to update stuff. Just hold on. Let's just go inside the source directory so you can see everything that's in there just for the fun of it and have like a familiar look at that. Everything in there, like I said, mandatory. A plugin, that's what blocks are. There's the forms, there's their event subscriber, the controller for all their paths, other routing and testing. And then they made a folder for themselves called Stack Middleware. That's where they're dumping all their common functionality that they haven't been able to park into some other proper class. Okay, so I'll stop. I really appreciate it very much, like I said. I know that this was a very busy thing and you have a lot of time, and I hope that you found some very good information in that. And have a good day.